Hey guys, welcome back. All right, let's discuss a little bit about magic, specifically sex magic. Really, I think they're all forms of sex magic, but this can be a bit of a touchy subject. No pun intended. But what I'm going to share with you is going to be not necessarily from direct experience, but more from witness accounts that people have generously shared with me, and their experiences with it and their knowledge of it, and then my research that I've put into it in the history and the groups that actually practice this sort of thing. Now, the highest, let's say, form of sex magic would be having a child, right? You're literally creating something. You're creating another human being, right? Now it takes two components for that, right? The male and the female, the sperm and the egg, to do that. And you'll have to excuse the birds in the background, but I think they're having their own sex magic currently, so it was that time of the season. Anyways, the child, right? The recreation, the procreation, the reproduction, reproduce, right? Reproduce. Now, that's innately what our bodies are pulling us to do, right? So there's an inherent suffering, an inherent gap or void that is desired to be filled by both sexes. Now, I say that this is particularly due to the split Adam and his etheric body, and that resulted in two separate physical bodies. And the creation of this innate sexual suffering, not just humans, but all animals, let's say. Now, the other form of this, you don't necessarily have to create a physical being. You can create physical objects as well, right? A lot of people may have heard of this in the law of attraction groups in the New Age, where you use sexual practices, Tantra, to then manifest specific results. Now, I believe this is more pertinently practiced with a partner, but it can be done by yourself. But what I want to make you aware of in these practices, okay, first of all, these practices stem all the way back from at least the Atlanteans. And from there was derived what is known as a race of Aryans, right? Noah received guidance from God / Yahweh, which is the God of this matrix, to build an ark and supposedly gather animals or DNA of specific animals and avoid the flood, right? Escape alive. Essentially, Noah was from these Atlanteans, and he settled in the Caucasus Mountains. And from there derived the Aryan, what we know as the Aryan race. And we'll get more into that in a little bit, but just to provide some context about these practices. Now, we know what happened with the Atlanteans. The Atlanteans were actually said to have devolved from their true spiritual nature, because, and I'm still trying to piece the pieces together here, to connect the pieces. Were they in a more etheric body, potentially, right? Or a more astral-like body, where their full spiritual power was emanating, was to be tapped in. And then what is said to have happened is they mated, these beings mated with mortals. And then we have this idea of fallen angels happening, where it could have been Adam, actually, mating with the female mortals, right, designed by the Matrix to lower the spiritual ability, to degrade the spiritual essence. And, they've developed more of an ego. So all their esoteric practices turned very dark, specifically sexual magic, right? So then they started using it from a more lustful approach. So anytime really you partake in this lustful approach to it, it's black magic. Because, and here's what was shared with me, to have, let's say, a more positive intent behind this practice, you would need to set intentions, pure intentions, and create a sort of contractual agreement with the other being, saying that, hey, in this practice, we will be very compassionate toward each other. It will be from a place of love. And what we seek to do is rather create love, right? Or the idea of love in our bodies as they become one. And this doesn't even have to be full-blown sexual intercourse. It could be, it's actually depicted in the Hindu religion as two beings coming together, third eye to third eye, forehead to forehead, nose to nose, and just holding that compassion for each other, right? That loving embrace. And this can actually be very healing. So there is a very practical result from this, from just this practice. But what I'm here to warn and to advise is that, you know, throughout New Age is the idea of, oh, you need your twin flame, you need, you know, this partner to practice, to have these occult practices, essentially, where you both raise each other's vibration, and through this, you're able to do it to really heal everything, heal all your traumas. Now, sexual energy is creative energy. It is the essence of this matrix, right? Sex is actually derived from Latin word sextant, which means six. So sex is 666. Sex also derives from hexagram, right? There's 6 sides to a hexagram, so sex can be a hex. Now, if practiced in this way, what you're doing is creating a very strong bond with the other person. Even just normal sex creates a very strong bond, right? We all know that. But especially with the sexual magic, with Tantra, as many may know it, it creates a very strong connection and emotional bond to the other person. Whereas if that person hurts in any way, you will then take that on as yourself, or every little thing will start bothering you that maybe in relation to that person. If they, you know, for example, look at another person, all of a sudden you start breaking down because you feel like they're wronging you, right? So it's a very strong emotional bond that is created, whether it's white or black, right? Black is more for the purpose of taking the other person's essence, right? The person with the lower vibration will likely take the other person's high vibrational energy and create a balance. That's usually what happens in all lustful connections. While on the other one, it serves more to facilitate both parties in an energetic, higher energetic state, to create these higher orgasmic states in the body. So before we get to the more positive aspect, what I want to share is that the Nazis, who were very well versed in Aryan philosophy, right? That's why they sought to recreate this Aryan race, because they knew about Atlantis. They knew what happened with that strong root race that got destroyed, right? So it was the Atlanteans, and then into the 5th root race, which was known as the Aryans, I believe Blavatsky and Rudolf Steiner. And they studied these practices, okay? And they had a very interesting practice between their soldiers, right? So remember, man on man, this was happening, sexual magic, man on man. And what happened is, it's very similar to the army practices, what they do in this form of sort of MK Ultra. They strip you of your identity and they create a strong brotherhood, right? So through these practices, essentially all the soldiers would die for each other, because that was more than just their brother. That was like the love of their life at one point, even if you can describe it like that, or if that makes sense. It's like essentially another version of them that they bonded with through this occult sex magic, right? So that, in a sense, was used to dominate and invade other countries, other armies, right, by the Nazi occultists. Their mistake apparently was that they trusted astrology over their own military tactics, and they failed in invading Russia in that. But who knows what really happened. And so you have to understand that there's a very strong potential for that entanglement with other people if you were to practice such a thing, especially if it's not from a pure standpoint. Now, even if we look at the pure standpoint, okay, so we have the creation of the child, right? We discussed that in other videos. Is it truly beneficial to have children in this matrix? Maybe, maybe not. That's in one of my other videos called Having Children in the Matrix. If you want to check that out, check that out. But let's say, okay, you approach it from a pure standpoint, which is described by the Aryans in Tibet, in India, right? The Indians and the Europeans are actually very interconnected. The Indo-Europeans, they're all derivations of the Aryan root race. So they describe it as the more white Tantra, right? Where they use sex without releasing the seminal fluid, but another form of Tantra, for the purpose of prolonging the orgasm and creating a heightened level of consciousness. Right now, this is what it is described in the New Age. This is what I'm saying. Like, everything in this world seems to be like an initiation into these higher rites of the Great White Brotherhood, potentially the ones running the show, or the Ascended Masters, or whatever, the Archons. And they would essentially go into these trance-like states. So let's say you don't go into trance-like state and you just stay maybe in that pureness, in that compassion, that healing. You will experience a lot of healing. Your body's vibration more than likely will naturally rise and clear a bunch of stored emotional trauma, which is, in my opinion, a very good thing and what you need to do to avoid the afterlife reincarnation process, okay? But where this takes a turn is that then being in this trance-like state, achieving these higher states of consciousness, then puts you in a similar place that I talked about in my meditation video, where all of a sudden you start connecting with things that you don't necessarily want to connect to, okay? Because remember, these beings are still at a higher level of, let's say, vibration or consciousness. They're just vibrating quicker. That doesn't necessarily mean that they want the best for you, okay? And we're gonna tie this all back to the Atlanteans and the Olympians. But you will end up connecting to these, potentially these Olympians, these Archons, these Ascended Masters. And if you're not careful, that's what you will essentially become a vessel for. Some say through your subconscious. You start accessing them through your subconscious, right? You start receiving, like many people may start receiving messages in their dreams, and they misinterpret it as a good thing, like, oh, you know, this is the friendly being, I need to connect with them, blah, blah. Just like all these close encounters with extra dimensional beings, right? So that's something to be aware of. Now, tying this back to the Atlanteans, for those of you on Twitter that follow me, you've seen that I commented on this podcast. I don't even know how I stumbled onto it, but it's about the book Artemis Unveiled, which Artemis is the moon, so unveiling the moon. And he was talking about the dark side of the moon and how actually they have these cities and they're using, they being these Nordics. Now, Aryans, remember, are described as Nordic-looking people. They're described as these tall blondes with blue eyes, potentially even redheads. And they're using slave labor to create the craters. Now, scientists have noticed a very interesting anomaly about the craters on the moon. Craters are actually like 180 miles wide, but only 3 miles deep. So if a natural impact of an asteroid happened, please explain how they would only be 3 miles deep on the moon. Right, so that makes no sense. Well, this guy's claiming that they're actually Nordics up there and they're using slave labor to mine these craters. And he actually defines them as the Olympians and talks about the Devas and the Asuras, the Olympians and the Titans. So what happened as a result of the demise of, or to cause rather the demise of the Atlanteans, he's saying it was a Titan-inspired human rebellion. Now, these Titans actually may have mated with the humans. Because remember, what I subscribe to and what is presented in the book Can You Stand the Truth is that the Titans are actually the astral entities. And that makes a lot of sense to me. The astral entities being human thought forms. So the humans created the Titans in a sense, and the Titans came down and made it with the humans, potentially. And at the time, or previously, the Titans tried revolting against the Olympians numerous times. And the Olympians are these ascended masters, the Zeus, the whatever, the Isis, not Isis, but you know, I'm talking about the Venus. That's Roman. Aphrodite, yeah, Aphrodite. All the Olympians. And the Titans are led by Kronos. And they tried revolting against these Olympians numerous times, but were shut down and essentially sentenced to Tartarus. And afterwards, from my understanding, they reached out to the humans, again, through these astral-infused modalities, specifically technology, I think, because it was said the Atlanteans had a higher developed technology, and that's what led to their demise. So I think that's how they were communicating with these beings. And who do we have underground today, supposedly? The reptilians, right? Are these reptilians really astral entities created by the humans in Tartarus, fighting against the ascended masters, right? We love to blame everything on the reptilians and this and that, but what about the ascended masters? What about all these guys that essentially were also fighting the reptilians, but for control rather, not for our safety? So they it led to their demise, and this guy is saying that the Olympians and the Titans, or Olympians and the humans, fought with a Titan-inspired rebellion against the Olympians, and they were under the control of Poseidon at the time. That's one of the Olympians. The Atlanteans were under control of Poseidon. Zeus had put them under control of Poseidon, and Poseidon had sent many prophets to warn them that no, you dwindled into egoic ways of conquest. What you're doing is wrong, and ends up sinking Atlantis, aka the result of the flood. We have Noah's Ark and the migration of Atlantean esoteric knowledge throughout what is known as current day Europe into the Caucasus Mountains, and then spreading from there, more than likely, as opposed to what we have the current out of Africa theory, although there are hominids that were said to have mated with other species, potentially. This is where I'm at currently on this view. Now, if these Nordics truly are on the moon, then that's a huge expose of, you know, their intentions, right? These Aryans, who these Aryans truly are. Oh, to discuss the actual name. So where does Aryan sound like it come from? Aryan sounds like Aries. Aries, we have the age of Aries, which they could have existed about 3,000 years ago, right? After the fall of Atlantis. But also we have Mars. Well, first of all, we have the Polarians, so they could have stemmed initially from the North Pole, from the Garden of Eden, where it was nice and warm at the time. But it said actually that they landed in ships. So they could have initially went underground to Agartha from the North Pole. But also, the ruler of Aries is Mars. And remember, these Aryans were red-haired, ginger-like also. Some of them, not all of them. But warlike. So, and this guy also describes that there could have been actually a nuclear war on Mars. Could have been the same battle, the Olympians and the Titans. Maybe, right? The Aryans. But they could have come from Mars to the North Pole, into Agartha, and spread outwards. At least that's a physical interpretation. How that relates on the astral level, I'm not sure. Is Mars a different astral dimension rather than an actual physical location that we can travel to? I don't know, because it's claimed that we have been to the moon, that, you know, there are physical people, slave labor on the moon. Maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure. But these are pieces that we have to entertain because there are possibilities. Now, the reason he says that these people are on the moon is because it was remote viewed. I forgot to mention. Okay, so remote viewers literally sat down and saw these beings using slave labor there. So that's another, let's say, argument for the fact that this place isn't all that it's made up to be, right? The most beautiful, whatever realm, and we're here to learn lessons. Well, what are those people on the moon doing? I don't think they're teaching us very many lessons, okay? So, just something to be aware of. If we're truly onto something on this channel, then all these pieces will come together at one point, okay? Let me know what you thought in the comments. Give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.